We begin with the escalating controversy over the Ontario Greenbelt land swap. Premier Doug Ford says there will be a top-to-bottom review of that decision. Here's a reminder of how it all started. Ontario's Greenbelt is 2 million acres of protected land stretching from Niagara Falls to Peterborough. Doug Ford said in 2018 he wouldn't touch it.
Unequivocally, we won't touch the Greenbelt.
But then 4 years into his job as Premier, Ford changed his mind, carving out 7,400 acres to build 50,000 homes and swapping in 9,400 acres of protected land elsewhere. Developers stood to make billions of dollars, so the Auditor General looked into it and found a small group of developers was heavily influencing the decision-making.
This is a flawed process. This was a biased process.
A second report followed from the province's Integrity Commissioner, and it found the Minister of Housing, Steve Clark, was in ethical breach.
And to Ontarians, I want to say very sincerely that I apologize. I'm here to accept responsibility.
Both Clark and his Chief of Staff have now resigned. Now, Premier Ford was asked today if there could be more Greenbelt land earmarked for development, and he's not ruling it out.
We admit our mistakes. I've come out here, we've apologized, we're moving forward. We're going to make sure that there's merit to every application that comes forward. But in saying that, nothing, again, is more important than building homes for the people of Ontario.
We asked for an interview with Ontario's new Housing Minister, Paul Calandra. He was not made available. We did, however, reach Ontario New Democratic Party leader Marit Stiles. Ms. Stiles, welcome back to the show.
Hi, great to be here.
So you characterized the review announced by Premier Ford today as a sham. What makes you say that?
Well, first of all, we've had 2 reviews conducted and reports released in the last month. Those were extensive investigations conducted by independent officers, the Auditor General and the Integrity Commissioner. So we've had 2 significant reviews of this government's dealings with the land that has been swapped out of Ontario's Greenbelt. So when the Premier comes out today and says that he's going to be conducting yet another review, to me, it just sounds like he's trying to distract and detract again from what we already know. I think it's a colossal waste of our money and our time as Ontarians when the government knows exactly what they need to do. They need to recall the legislature and they need to return that land to the Greenbelt. This whole process has been one of corruption and collusion with developers, and the only solution now for the Premier is to return that land.
Is there anything they can do with this review? Because I take your point about the Integrity Commissioner and the Auditor General sort of looking back at how we got to this point, but they seem to be trying to be forward-looking here to figure out what to do with various land to deal with the housing situation. So is there anything they can do with this review that would reassure you that it's not a sham?
No, I don't buy it because, first of all, report after report after report by even the Premier's own task force looking at the housing needs and how to solve the housing crisis in Ontario have said that we don't need to develop in the Greenbelt. In fact, it's really going to be more expensive, it's going to take longer, and it's not going to build the kind of truly affordable housing that Ontarians need. So their choice to develop these lands in the first place, to carve out these lands, was deeply flawed. The only reason they did it, it has never been about building housing. It has only ever been about making a few very wealthy friends, connected conservative insiders, even wealthier.
Well,
and now we know that the whole process was corrupted. So they don't need that. They need to focus on where they can actually build effectively, efficiently to get that housing done.
But the review now seems to be going even broader than these specific parcels that were part of this particular controversy. As the Premier Ford said today, they're reviewing basically everything that's in the Greenbelt. So are you concerned that this review could result in even more Greenbelt land being open up for development?
Exactly. I mean, what they're doing is they're digging in even further, and they're using this as an excuse to open up the entire Greenbelt to development. And the Premier, he's hinted at this in the past. And let's not forget, I mean, there were years where the Premier lied to Ontarians. He said he was going to develop it, then he lied and said he wasn't, then he suddenly changes his mind after the last provincial election here. So nobody trusts him out there. And I think that's really important because Ontarians are really angry about this right now. Everywhere I go, people are furious. They were angry enough that he was planning to pave over these really important farmlands and also, by the way, important ecosystems that help mitigate against climate change. But the fact that he's now, being found to be directly implicated in this corruption and collusion with developers is a really big problem. And the fact that he's using this as an excuse to dig deeper and potentially carve up more of the Greenbelt, I mean, it's really outrageous.
I just want to interject there if I can. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you said he's been directly implicated. The issues are with former Minister Clark and his chief of staff. I mean, what's the direct implication for Premier Ford? I don't think the Auditor General or the Integrity Commissioner has pointed the finger directly at the Premier on this.
Well, the Integrity Commissioner's report actually is 166 pages. And in that report, there are numerous references to the Premier himself, and notes by civil servants about him passing over files directly to the chief of staff. We know, and we're learning more every day about his personal connection to some of these rather shady characters, alleged illegal lobbyists. And so there's actually within that report there he is very directly implicated. The problem we all have right now is that the Premier refuses to share his phone records, access to his email. So he's still hiding a lot of this from the people of Ontario. But there's direct implications in that report and in those findings of the Integrity Commissioner. And don't forget as well, in addition to requesting that report, an investigation by the Integrity Commissioner, I have an outstanding complaint to the Integrity Commissioner regarding the Premier. He hasn't even begun that investigation into the Premier's connections to developers that attended some of his private family functions at exactly the time that we know developers were handing over the plans they wanted to be legislated in this province.
I just want to be fair to Premier Ford here, because I know there was in one of the reports that Ryan Amato, the now former chief of staff, the notes say that he claimed to be speaking for the Premier, on the Premier's behalf, acting on his orders, but there's some suggestion that he may have just been kind of bluffing to sort of pump up his authority in the meeting when he did that. But just to move on, I mean, as a final point, what do you think needs to happen next on this? We're getting the review. We don't yet know the shape and form and structure of it. What do you think needs to happen next?
He needs to cancel this. It's not necessary. We know it needs to happen. As I've been saying every single day, he needs to recall the legislature and he needs to introduce legislation. It needs to be legislation to restore those lands back to the Greenbelt. And by the way, this will not end. This is just the tip of the iceberg. It's just scratching the surface. There's more investigations coming from the Integrity Commissioner. We've just released today information about some connections of some of these same people to the Ontario Place deal that's ongoing. So I think the Premier is going to have a lot more questions to answer, and I think he just needs to do the right thing and get this deal done. Like, let's just end this paving over the Greenbelt. Ontarians are really suffering. There really is a housing crisis in this province, and the solutions are not to build more luxury sprawl in this province, right? People need a government that's standing up for them. Okay.
Ontario NDP leader Marit Stiles, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
All right, we turn now to two journalists who know this story well. Sabrina Nenji is a journalist and founder at the Queen's Park Observer, and Rob Ferguson is a Queen's Park reporter at the Toronto Star. Thank you both for joining me.
Hi, David.
Let me start by offering my condolences. It must have been a terrible Labor Day Monday holiday for you. So, Sabrina, let's start there. It's this wild, long weekend, a cabinet resignation in the morning, a shuffle later in the day, a new review today. Sabrina, your thoughts on what's transpiring with the Ford government in all of this?
Yeah, it's been a whirlwind 24 hours, but a lot of this seemed like it was almost inevitable that the Ford government saw the writing on the wall. I mean, we just heard Marit Stiles. This is still not good enough for opposition critics. They're not letting up, but certainly I think, with Clark resigning here, it's just a slow drip. Do I think it's enough to stop the bleeding? No, I think it's actually bloodying the waters. I mean, there are still reports to come from the Integrity Commissioner. The police have been sniffing around. We have yet to see if they're going to do a full-on investigation into this. But for Ford to kind of acknowledge that this process was flawed and not do a full reversal, I don't know if that's really going to fly with the public, because as we know, it's become a credibility issue. If you are admitting the process is flawed, how can people really trust the results of that process? So I don't think this headache is going away anytime soon for the Ford government, despite the developments over the weekend.
Rob, there's so much about this controversy. Like, there's a character in this by the name of Mr. X, according to the Integrity Commissioner, who your paper reported as the former Clarington Mayor John Mutton. CBC later confirmed that. I mean, he denies it. I want to be fair to Mr. Mutton, but like, what do we know about Mr. Mutton, Mr. X, and his role in this entire thing?
Well, he was trying to get a property rezoned and opened up for development. And if he did so, he would have been, and the municipality went through with it, he would be entitled to like a $1 million fee. And one thing he did was take the minister's deputy chief of staff out for lunch. And that's one thing that the Integrity Commissioner waved a finger at in that report, because that's kind of a dicey situation to be in. So we're looking a lot more into the role that Mr. X played, and I wouldn't be surprised if the RCMP, which is, as Sabrina said, is sniffing around whether they're going to do a full-on investigation. I wouldn't be surprised if that's one of the things they're looking at, because that would make Mutton an unregistered lobbyist.
Right. So, Sabrina, we have the Mr. X character, John Mutton, who's being investigated. We have a resigned cabinet minister, a resigned chief of staff. Marit Stiles claimed in the interview that Ford has been directly implicated in that. I've yet to see clear evidence implicating the premier directly. What's your sense of his role in this, what we know at this point?
Yeah, I heard Marit say that, and I think you were right to point out that the Integrity Commissioner just sort of concluded that Ryan Amato was name dropping. But I do think that this report has raised a lot of questions more than answers, and I think there are still stones to be unturned here. I do think that at the end of the day, the premier, as he likes to say, the buck stops with him. And certainly, what we now know from the ministerial mandate letters, which the Ford government has tried its best to keep under wraps. They're going to the top court to keep these, marching orders from the premier to his cabinet, secret. But what we do know is that it was a direct order from the premier to his minister that they work quickly to open up these Greenbelt lands. And I think that was something that really stood out to me in Clark's, initial digging in his heels. And then, he eventually resigned, but he had said and told the Integrity Commissioner that, after 4 years of me as the minister and our government saying that we're not going to rip up the Greenbelt, now we're doing it. And he had some qualms with that. And I guess that is part of one of the factors, as he told David Wake, our ethics watchdog, that led to him, as the watchdog said, burying his head in the sand on this, because it is, a very political hot potato for the Ford government. And, is it enough what's happened over these few days to really stop, the bleeding? And with this government, I'm not sure if this review that Ford announced today is going to do it.
But, Rob, we've got the Auditor General's report and the Integrity Commissioner, which basically concludes this process was a mess, right? Whatever you think of it, it was not done well. We've got independent reports saying you don't need this land from the Greenbelt to address Ontario's housing challenges. How should we be looking at this, given those clear and stark findings in contrast to the government's position?
Well, what I think is interesting, when you put it that way, I mean, today it looks like he might be opening more of the Greenbelt with this wider review. So it's almost like he tried to make it sound like he's taking action on the concerns, but actually what he could very well be doing is opening things up wider. So, saying you're going to do a review of something that was bad and maybe or seen as bad by the watchdogs and open up wider, it's like saying, I'm going to review my bad chocolate eating habits, and while you're eating the chocolate bar, which I may have done an hour ago. So I think once people see something like that, they will probably twig to this a little more and get even more concerned, because we've got a new poll out today showing that this is continuing to detract from the Conservatives' popularity. And they've had quite a hit in the last week.
Yeah, David Coletto from Abacus Data has numbers out showing a 7-point drop for the government. So, I guess, Sabrina, that brings us to the question of whether Steve Clark quit or got quit. I mean, what are you watching for next on this one?
Yeah, I think, they've called in Paul Calandra, government House leader. He's sort of been the government's troubleshooter. He had taken over the troubled long-term care file. He's definitely a heavy hitter in question period, and no doubt the opposition will be hammering the government on this when the House returns as scheduled later this month. So I think, Calandra now having to review the work of the previous minister that was in hot water. I guess, as Fergie pointed out here, the numbers are not looking so good for the Ford government. But I think if anyone in cabinet was going to take this on, Calandra is probably a good pick for the Ford government, especially when it comes to giving the government's line. And they've been spinning this narrative of it's all about housing, but I don't think that's really going to fly with the public so much anymore. One number that I've been paying attention to that David Coletto and Abacus has been tracking is that more and more people are now believing the Ford government is in it for themselves, in it for insiders. And, it's summer. It's still summer. It's a long weekend. People are paying attention to this. And I think that as much as the premier likes to say he goes to Walmart and talks to folks there and that's his polling, I think, the writing really could be on the wall for the PCs with this.
Yep, there's a lot of Walmarts in Ontario, and I can't go to all of them to truly get the pulse. So Rob, same question to you, just as a final point. What are you watching for next on this particular story?
Well, I'm watching whether the RCMP is going to investigate. I mean, if that does happen, it's going to be huge. If you think back to the previous Liberal government's gas plant scandal a decade ago, once the OPP got investigating that, they ended up laying charges against former Premier's Chief of Staff and Deputy Chief of Staff. And that Chief of Staff was convicted and sentenced to 4 months in jail for wiping computer hard drives of records that should have been public. So, if police get involved, I'm not saying that there's a direct parallel with gas plants. What I am saying is when police get involved, it's a huge, huge, huge wild card.